That's fine.
Perfect. Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you.
You betcha.
So what's your story?
My story? Well, my name's James Young. I live in Victoria, British Columbia. Moved out from Toronto about almost 20 years ago. Played string bass, electric bass. I'm a man of styles. I really love playing different styles. If one could describe my playing style, it'd be like a musical anthropologist. I really take pride in the amount of different styles that I've learned to play over the years, and worked at them, from salsa to classical music to all sorts of things. So that's sort of where I'm at. As far as jazz goes, I've been in jazz since I was 18 years old, since I started playing classical and jazz at the same time. When I was in high school, I actually missed the whole rock and roll thing, because I was playing classical music in a youth orchestra, and I was playing jazz with my string bass, and then rock and roll didn't really come around until much later, when I got an electric bass for the first time and started playing around. So that's where I am, and now I'm here in
In a new trio.
In a new trio.
Yeah.
George McFetcher and I have known each other for many years. As a matter of fact, one of the first bands I ever played in jazz in Edmonton, where I grew up, was with George. And I look over there off
And
camera.
of course, George
is
is from
Edmonton. And George is from Edmonton as well. So that was quite a few years ago. And then I think we all left town after that. I think George left and moved to Toronto, and I moved to Boston a few years later, and ended up in Toronto probably about 20 years ago, or more. Quite a few more years after
Early
that.
90s.
Take that back. I'll edit that one out later. It's on the internet. And rediscovered George when I found out he was living in Souk. I was in Victoria, so naturally we started playing with each other a little bit, and here we are, right? So
when you first got together, was it the two of you, or were you trying to bring in some other musicians?
well, when I first discovered that George was living here, I was actually putting together like bebop bands, and we were doing I was doing like a 5-piece thing with sort of like Woody Shaw, Freddie Hubbard type music, and so I brought George into that, and so we sort of moved on from there. And then we actually formed a band with some local Victorian musicians called Faux Bamboo, which is a 5-piece band, and we played a lot of George's music and some of mine. And we did a lot of rehearsal bands. We played about once a month in Victoria in a local high school, just in the afternoon. So we had a really nice rehearsal band going. I got to play a lot of great new music with lots of different composers.
So, have you done this kind of thing of approaching the sort of no tunes philosophy before?
Back in Toronto, we did a fair amount of playing. I played in a couple of different bands with some of the more we used to call them avant-garde, but I don't really like those terms, but sort of more newer jazz music, and did a lot of playing around town,
More exploratory,
and did a couple of cross-country tours with sort of more freedom music, and doing that as well. Yeah. So I'm quite comfortable in the genre. I really am a big fan of conversational music, and being able to spontaneously compose collectively has always been one of my biggest goals, and the groups that I'm in, I'm quite proud of that, because it's a cooperative effort, which means that we all have to spend some time cooperatively cooperating, I think that word, to form a common goal, which is to create this spontaneous music that is created out of the internal conversations of our mind, or in my case, my styles.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have, I think, when they hear the term free music, they have the idea of something that has no structure.
Right.
But that's really a misconception, because really what's happening is you're making the structure as you go along, cooperatively.
That's right. Yeah.
Cooperatively and building it together. Are there particular elements that you look for in building that structure when you're listening to the other guys playing?
Well, I think what's really important is to find a common ground at first. And being that we're all like jazzers in that sense, I mean, there's a common sensibility about improvisation that we can use as a bed to move from. And because we're all sort of, and I'm not speaking for the other gents in the band, but there's a certain amount of tradition that we've all played through the years that's part of us, and that also forms a nice bed of starting points for conversations.
So that experience with other kinds of structure leads you to well, I guess tonal changes
Yeah.
and I guess pleasing sort of shifts in
Yeah.
in melodic.
Right.
One of the things that that I noticed in listening to some of your music is that there is a lot of call and response and people starting one phrase and somebody else sort of finishing the phrase or taking elements of it and inverting little bits of it. Are there other techniques that you can think of?
Yes, what we've been exploring in the last session that we did the other day is we started talking a lot about having preconceived ideas, almost like a song or a tune. So instead of calling off, hey, A train and F,
Right.
so we might be saying, okay, so this song we're gonna start off with a nice strong theme from the piano, whatever key, we don't really know, maybe the piano player will decide. And then after we establish that and play around with that, when we were finished with that, we're going to start exploring the extremities of our instruments, like either the high or low register. And we'll use, after that, we'll just sort of pull that into that little section and we'll make it so we talk about concepts like that. Or let's do a ballad, and that means that James, the bass player, will lead off with his own melody that he just created.
So in a sense, you're taking sort of meta musical concepts like texture and mood and everything else, and using those as the framework.
Yes, and another thing I'd like to point out is that what we're also striving for is sometimes a lot of like sort of creative music can be very atonal and very sort of non-rhythmical, or try and really push the boundaries to the point where you don't want to use any of the constructs from before or any of the traditions. But in this band, I think that's just part and parcel of our conversation. Right. So away from the sort of angular avant-garde movement of of like this, that, and it has to be different from everything else. Right. If we fall into a nice, beautiful melody that somebody created, and we may just go along with that, and there may be some wonderful rhythmic African, salsa rhythm that comes out, and we'll just go with that. Like we're not as concerned much about creating a space or creating a statement as collectively creating a composition that's got some form and structure. Right. And if it goes very melodic, that's even the better.
Well, a lot of people who are new to the music as well are sometimes put off by aggressiveness within that. And I notice that you guys are really polite with each other. Is that a reflection of your personality?
Well, I would say probably too, right?
Okay. Canadian, eh?
Canadian, eh? Well,
I hesitated. I didn't quite want to go there.
Well, I mean, I think also integral in this style of music is we have to listen.
Right.
And if we listen hard, there's a certain amount of respect that comes from that because you listen deeply, and so that listening and it becomes a part of the group of the group dynamics, right? So that kind of makes us being much more polite. But at the same time, if somebody has a great idea, we'll all, like if George, for example, has this great idea, Paul and I will just follow along. Right. We'll just follow along in the sort of more traditional piano trio ditto, and be the support, and then all of a sudden it might switch. And I might be the one that's leading, and then George and Paul will be in the support role of me. Right. And so, we can play with those roles, as a collective trio moving forward, or if one person soloing and the other will collect. That's that's where that sort of jazz tradition.
But as long as you've got that understanding,
yes,
then you can just let it happen spontaneously.
Yes, and we also want people to be part of our community, the musical sense that we encourage folks to listen and be part of our music. So one of the goals for me always is, I suppose as an artist, is to communicate. And I want people to be a part of our scene. So I don't want it to be so hard to listen to that it will be put folks off. Okay. Like I really want to be inclusive, and I want everybody to come in and say, I like this and I like you guys. Yeah, and I could be silly and say that it's more money for us too. But we're talking about creative music, so there's a certain implied, we're doing it for the money. So that's basically me in a nutshell. I play string bass, and I'll be doing a lot of bowling today, and I'm a big arco guy because of my classical roots, and where everything works, hopefully it works well. We'll have a nice, enjoyable time.
Sounds great.
Great, and that'd be good. George.
There's nothing left to say.
No.